Hey, and thank you everybody for showing up today for this episode of Wall Dropping History. As usual, I am your host, Mr. Waldrop, and let's go to webcam view. I'm your host, Mr. Waldrop, and thank you for joining us. I know school's out. Thank you for anybody that may show up and decide to dedicate your time to education. I love having anybody here with me. We're going to do the format. It's going to be a little different. Obviously, I've got my co-host with me, Elizabeth Waldrop. She's going to be helping me out. This is going to be kind of a difficult topic, but the format's going to change because this isn't an assignment that I can award points for anymore. I'm just going to pose the questions audibly, and if you want to leave your comments in the chat, you can. Obviously, nobody's required to, but I am interested to hear your thoughts on the topics. But you're not going to see any more of like the slides that have the request for, basically you chime in whenever you want, however you feel like it. Feel free to chime in. Okay, so let's go over the agenda real fast. If you want to be, so this Friday, I'm going to do the immigrant edition. If you have any stories about immigrants, please send them in. If you yourself are an immigrant, I want to hear your story. How did you come here? What happened? All that stuff, right? Maybe you have a parent. Maybe you have a friend. I want to share about the culture of, because, unless you're Native American, most of us came here from another country, right? So I kind of want to hear that story, right? So that's what we're going to do this Friday. For the agenda this week, today I'm talking about the history of lynching. Wednesday is going to be Pandemic Wednesday. Friday will be the culture of immigrants. I will be off Tuesday and Thursday, and I might stick with that format, doing this show 3 days a week. Let me see how many people show up and stuff like that to these things. But I might stick with that, but I'm definitely this week going to be off Tuesday and Thursday due to having to help proctor some AP tests. So I will be off Tuesday and Thursday. So no episode tomorrow. We'll be back for Pandemic Wednesday. So be sure to check that out. Okay, so without further ado, so what prompted me to do this? Well, I spend a lot of time debating on Facebook. I'll be honest, I do, right? And I saw a comment on Miss Jones's wall, and I don't know how many of y'all, she didn't teach 11th graders, but how many of y'all did or did not know her. And it was kind of a challenge of saying, there's a lot of white teachers out there, and we need more than just only black people caring about this huge topic, right? Like, this is going to need to be a all hands involved, everybody needs to care, right? I shouldn't care about lynchings because the people that are lynched look like me, right? I should care about lynching because it's a terrible thing to do and we should never do it, right? So what kind of kicked this into gear is obviously this I run with mod thing, right? So I'm going to kind of show you some of the videos. Now, when I show you some of the video, be warned, very, very disturbing, right? I cannot tell you that. The first time I saw this, I couldn't wrap my brain around it, right? It was almost like I was watching something. It's like this had to be out of a horror movie, right? Like some kind of like weird Stephen King movie or something like that. Like there's part of me that's like, I can't be seeing real life, live footage of this happening. It can't be real, I mean, I know it is. I'm just saying my brain couldn't metabolize what it was my eyes were seeing, that this just happened, right? So it is very disturbing. I just want you to know that before I show you this footage, right? So I'm going to show you this footage real fast. And again, viewer discretion is advised. If you got a little kid, I would not have the little kid. Normally my show is very little kid appropriate. I wouldn't say it's very appropriate for this clip. So turn away for this clip.
Now, video of the incident has emerged, and Michelle Cinder has our report.
A graphic video, a shocking shooting, and many unanswered questions. This cell phone footage is believed to show Ahmaud Arbery jogging in a South Georgia neighborhood before coming upon two men in a truck. The 25-year-old tries to get around them, and then the video released yesterday has brought national attention to the incident, which took place on February 23rd. Some believe this is yet another example of an unarmed black person shot and killed unfairly. Charges were not initially brought against the two men, Gregory McMichael and his son Travis. But after the video's release, a Georgia prosecutor announced he plans to call a grand jury.
He was a happy-go-lucky person. He loved his family.
Wanda Cooper is Arbery's mother. In an interview yesterday, she said the process has taken too long.
A lot of time has passed, and I'm ready to get these people who are responsible, in jail.
Gregory McMichael told police he thought Arbery looked like a suspect in a nearby burglary. He said he and his son followed Arbery and told him to stop. Then McMichael said Arbery, quote, began to violently attack them. McMichael had been an investigator in the district attorney's office and a police officer. And according to the New York Times, one of the original prosecutors on the case argued there was, quote, insufficient probable cause to arrest the two men. But he later requested to be removed from the case because his son worked in the prosecutor's office with Gregory McMichael.
By the way, thank y'all for showing up to Habeas Kira and Lee.
For immediate action.
Right now, we're calling for a law system that operates in integrity. And we believe that begins with the dismissal of the police chief that was in charge at the point of this incident.
Meanwhile, Georgia courts remain closed until at least June 13th due to the COVID-19 outbreak.
Okay. Whew. And let me tell you, I selected that video. I went through a ton of them, right? And I selected that video. You can see other videos that are even more graphic. I mean, it looks like it's something out of The Purge. Like they just hunted this jogger down and shot him in broad daylight. It's disturbing. It's horrific. There's no excuse for it in my opinion. Now, it should be of note, one of the things I've debated a lot of people on is I hear a lot of people, and by the way, I told y'all before, it's in the video before y'all hopped in, there's not going to be a slide for y'all to be asked to chime in, so chime in with your thoughts whenever you want to. My kind of thoughts are, what did you think about the footage, But, I'm sitting there and I'm watching it, and the number one thing I keep hearing a lot of people say, and there's a lot of social studies teachers afraid to teach this. And I understand why. There is a common thread that you hear a lot of social studies teachers are saying we got to wait till we have all the information. To which my kind of response to that is, give me some additional information that could possibly come out that could justify that. That's all I keep thinking. Like, what possibly could I find? What new information it could exist? Give me a hypothetical. Like, are we talking, like the two men were possessed by aliens? I mean, what new footage, what new evidence could be bared to light? And of course I have this other video too that I was going to show you. The somewhat defense of it, and it's basically the defense is that there was a construction site and a lot of people had been going in there because apparently there was access to water. It was like a water fountain. It is entirely possible that he did go in the construction site for water. That's possible, right? He is kind of being used as a water fountain for people jogging by. This is the person they think was him. He didn't steal anything. I mean, unless you want to call stealing a sip of water stealing. But he was definitely out jogging. That's without question. He jogged every day. But it's possible that he went into this construction site to get a sip of water. Now, I don't know that. And again, it's not confirmed this is the same guy, right? But even so, last I checked, drinking a sip of water shouldn't carry with it the death penalty, right? So, the owner of the property, he's defending these two guys. One of them was a retired cop. I don't know why I'm showing bees, but anyways, and it should be also noted that the footage officer says he ain't the only one, right? Earlier that day, there was a young white couple, young white kids that go in there all the time. So it's entirely possible, you see some white kids going in there to get some water. So it's entirely possible it could have been somebody else, right? But either way, this is the two guys' defense, and they're saying they're going to get these two guys off, and they might. But it prompted me, and let me tell you, I did run with Ahmaud. I did run I think it was 2.36 miles. It's just anything to show some solidarity. And whenever I do something like that, and whenever I post anything like that, I always think, it's not going to change anybody's mind. Like, nobody's going to see me standing up against something like this and come to the conclusion of, I'm going to change my whole worldview. It's mostly just to tell somebody out there who, I'll tell you this, when I told this story to my wife, her first thought was, well, I'm not jogging by myself anymore. And I tell you, that was a punch in the gut. Because I jog every day by myself. Every day. I jogged this morning. Jogged about 3 miles all over my neighborhood, drenched in sweat by myself, right? And I never once ever had to worry, am I going to get shot? Are they going to shoot? Are they going to think I don't belong in my neighborhood and they're going to shoot me? I never had to worry about that. And realizing that my wife would have to worry about that. And I don't blame her, right? Like, my kind of response has been, we just have to wait and jog with me. So what are your thoughts? I mean, some of y'all have seen this footage. Y'all have seen what happened. I'm curious, what do you think about that whole event? I mean, how did it affect you? How did it affect you, Elizabeth? I mean, I don't know if you'd seen the footage yet, but...
I've never seen that before. It's kind of scary.
It's painful. Yeah, it's just painful. And let me tell you, this is a gut-wrenching episode. So I decided what I would do is I would go back and I would talk about the history of lynching, right?
I don't know what it is. So.
Yeah, and let me tell you this, DeHavius, I tell you, it breaks my heart. It breaks my heart. You're young, you're in fairly good shape, I'm assuming. You have the right to be able to go out and jog through your neighborhood or wherever, right? It terrifies me to think that, somebody like you would have to worry about that. Oh, man. Yeah, I can't imagine. I can't imagine, right? So let's figure out, what is lynching? Where did it come from, right? So by definition, a lynching is to put to death by mob action without legal approval or permission, right? So a group of people, the traditional sense of, everybody's coming out with pitchforks and torches and stuff like that, right? Now, when a group does it, they're often referred to as a lynch mob, right? It does not have to carry with it some racial connotations to it. It often has, but it is not required to. But the verb comes from the phrase lynch law, which is a punishment without a trial. Now, this phrase began in the 1780s when there were two brothers named Charles Lynch and William Lynch created the term for how they claimed to have dealt with the Tories in Virginia. What is a Tory, you ask? Well, just because we won the American Revolution did not mean that everybody that lived in colonial America was celebrating. There was still a large group of people that felt like we needed to go groveling back to England and beg the king, please, King George, take us back, right? Now, these people were called Tories, right? These are British loyalists, and they would often spread their information, their message, to other people to try to convince them, hey, we need to abandon this America and go back to being a colony of Great Britain, right? Now, these two brothers, Charles and William Lynch, decided to start hanging these folks. And they basically called themselves Lynch. The phrase came from their action, right? They weren't governed by law. They were just taking the law into their own hands, that these Tories needed to go, and they were going to start hanging them, right? Now, it should be of note, they're going to morph into different parties, but they're going to eventually become today's modern Republican. Right, so that is the genesis of the Tories, right? The conservative movement in America. Now, even after the passing of the brothers, the term would carry on a term used for extrajudiciary punishment, right? The term is often used in terms of relation to retaliation to a murder. So, for example, to the right, there was a huge amount of anti-Italian sentiment in New Orleans. You ever been in that area near Bienville Square, Jacksonville Square type area, where there's got that big church in New Orleans? Where all the street performers are at? You know what I'm talking about? This is that area, and they basically hung up a bunch of Italians in the street because they didn't want any Italians in New Orleans. It's a heavily French area. So the term lynching carries on after these two brothers, just because they made it so famous. Now, tensions grew during the Civil War. In a build-up to the Civil War, lynching became a common punishment for both runaway slaves and for the white people that would help them, right? It was used not only to punish them, but as a terrorist tactic, right? To discourage people from doing that activity. Now, let me ask you this. Why do you think they would publicly hang them?
So they're like, okay, so if you do this thing, then you get hanged for it. So don't do it.
Right. It's to send a message, right? They want to send a message, right? And kind of my question is now, what are some other things you think we as a country do, good or bad, to send a message to people? It's not going to change the law, but it sends a message. What are some things you can think of? Anything you can think of, good or bad? You mentioned one the other day in relation to the color pink.
People think that pink is like a girl color and that...
No, not that. You were talking about what does pink mean to you? What does it mean to you?
Breast cancer awareness.
Right. The color pink doesn't carry with it any special significance, but we created it, right, to be a symbol of something. The I Run With Maud campaign was kind of to show people that there were people out there that were against this, right? So I'm curious, what do you think in the comments below? What are some examples you can think of where something is a symbol of something else, right? I think of like red ribbon awareness for AIDS, the rainbow flag for gay pride, trying to think of some other things. Black Lives Matter, the hashtag Black Lives Matter, the Black Fist from Black Panthers, Me Too, the Me Too movement. Curious if y'all can think of some other ones maybe I had not thought of. Put those in the comment section below. Okay, so following the events of the Civil War, it was used as a terrorist tactic to oppress blacks, seemingly asking for any semblance of equality. It was especially used to prevent black people from voting, and lynchings would often become town events. Look at that. Look, there's kids. There's kids walking around. Oh yeah, the black and blue flag for cops. That's a good one, right? To show solidarity among cops. Absolutely. Good point. Now, racial tension would grow, especially in southern states. People were blaming their financial problems on the newly freed slaves. Lynchings became a popular way of resolving anger that whites had in retaliation for the freedom found by blacks.
Oh wait, I just thought of one. Would the American flag count? Like it stands for freedom?
Sure. That's a great example. That's a good example.
I was just thinking about it because I was thinking about flags. I'm like, oh, the
Right.
American flag.
Now, from 1882 to 1968, 4,743 lynchings occurred in the U.S. Whew. Now,
Ow.
of these people that were lynched, 3,446 of them were black. The amount of black people lynched made up 72.7% of the people lynched. And it gets worse.
No.
It should also be of note that most lynchings never got recorded. So that's just the ones we have recorded. The real number could be 3, 4, 10 times that amount. We don't know, right? Now, it should also be of note, the number one cause, right behind black people, the number one racial group that was lynched was white people. And the number one cause cited for lynching of white people was that they were helping blacks. Right? So that was, the numbers are probably even worse than we realize. Right? That's just what we know.
Wait, so more white people were lynched?
No, more black people were lynched, but the number one cause for white people being lynched was that they were helping blacks.
Well, at least some people cared.
Right. Now, whites started lynching because they felt it was necessary to protect white women. Right? That was the number one reason given. Accusations of rape, attempted rape, or plans to rape women were the most common reasons given for why people were lynched. Rape was not common in the South, and it was hard to tell how many rapes were just simply blamed on black people. Right? So, there's no record of it to begin with. It's not recorded enough. it was not more common in the South, and part of that is just population, right? Like, there's just more people in the North, so you're going to have more rape up north, right? More people, easier access, right? So not only is there more people put on trial, or not put on trial, lynched for the crime of rape in an area where there's less people, we're also not sure how many of those black people were lynched because there was a rape and they just blamed it on the black guy. So that was a popular problem too. So number one problem is raping. Number two, the most second popular reason for lynching was accusations of murder or plans to attempt to murder. There's a lot of rich white people that really feared black retaliation. There was little to no evidence of any blacks ever attempting to commit murder. I'm not saying it never happened, but there was very little cases of it and almost no evidence of it. So here's my question. Where have you heard that before, that they're all murderers and rapists? Where have you heard that before? And I try to stay as apolitical as possible. I really do. But this is the oldest trick in the book, right? That anytime you want to demagogue a minority group, you just say, well, they're all murderers and rapists. Because who is ever going to defend murder and rape, right? No, those probably the most, right next to stealing, which even stealing is sometimes defensible, right? We all know if your kids are starving, you steal a loaf of bread. That's in the Bible, right? Murder and rape is never defensible. It's never defensible. Go ahead.
In the Bible, like you were saying, like when Jesus was put on trial against the other guy, I don't know who it was, but he was like a murderer and rapist of the town, and they said because of what they thought Jesus was doing, which was like, I don't know, like claiming to be a priest, but they thought he wasn't.
Right.
They chose the murderer and raper.
Right, and that's why, to kind of show that contrast, right? So, this was his campaign speech. He said, when Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best, they're not sending you, it's hard to read because his grammar's so terrible. They're not sending you. They're not sending you, they're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with us. It should be with them. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, and they're rapists. And some, I assume, are good people. Let me tell you this, and I don't want to go down a political spiral. However, there's nothing true about that. The average immigrant that comes here, even illegally...
Except for the last one. Some of them, like, a lot of them are good.
It ain't some. Yeah, it's most, right?
It's
the average immigrant that comes here, they just want to make a better life for themselves. That's it. They're not coming here because there's an abundance of women to rape or people to murder. In fact... I don't know if you've been around this country, but we're really good at locking people up. We're real good at locking up immigrants, and particularly good at locking up Hispanic immigrants. So this is the worst place on the planet if you're Hispanic and you're looking to come here to murder and rape people. This is the worst place on the planet to do it. So it doesn't make any sense at all, right? Now, the real reason was that, this is the real reason why there were so many lynchings, was that after the Civil War, many whites felt that that the freed blacks were getting away with too much freedom, and they needed to be controlled, right? And
didn't in the Constitution they like completely leave out women and blacks? Didn't they say all white men?
No, it just says all men, but they meant men, white men. Okay, so
all white men signed the Constitution.
Yeah, it was all white men. So this is the beginning of the Jim Crow era, right? Which I've done a whole lesson on. We all know about the Jim Crow era, right? Yeah. Okay, from the 1882 to 1968, Mississippi had the highest number of lynchings with 581. Georgia was second with 531. Texas was third with 493. 79% of the lynchings happened in the South. And of course you can see the heavy lynching states. These are almost all slave-owning states, right? In the South, a white supremacist organization would rise up to help oppress blacks. This new organization was called the Ku Klux Klan. And they made a glorified... they were made glorified with the creation of A Birth of a Nation, which is a film that was even shown in the White House. So they were seen as like this heroic rebel army that was going to keep the black people in the place. Even in the movie, he shows up and saves the white lady from being raped by black men. So that is the genesis of the Ku Klux Klan, right? And they're going to be responsible for a whole lot of these lynchings. Now, I'm going to go over a couple of cases of this, and I cannot stress this enough. Some of this is not suitable for young children. Some slides will not even have images because even if I could find them, I don't want to post them. It's too horrific. In seeing some of these stories are too difficult to hear, please turn away. So, the first story that I want to talk about is the lynching of Murderous Mary, right? Now, this is an elephant that accidentally stepped on the head of its trainer, and after killing the person, the elephant itself was lynched. And this is a photo of them having lynched the elephant. Okay? Now, this would spark a lot of outrage in the nation when they're like, goodness, they're lynching so much, they're lynching elephants down there? So it prompted a lot of national awareness, right? And then it's going to enter a guy named Walter White. Now,
an elephant.
Yeah, now hold on, it gets worse. Now, Walter White was sent by the NAACP to investigate these lynchings in Brooks, Georgia. A guy named Hampton Smith, who was an abusive plantation owner, had been shot and killed, right? So this is a white guy. He was a horribly abusive plantation owner. Somebody shot and killed him. A week-long manhunt resulted in the lynching of a guy named Hayes Turner. So there's no proof Hayes did it, but he was accused of it, and before he could ever face trial, they just lynch him, right? Now his wife, Mary Turner, begins denying that her husband had been involved in Smith's killing. So she's saying, look, my husband was not a murderer. You know, they killed him for no good reason. She's trying to get the law involved, right? All that stuff. So, after publicly opposing her husband's murder and threatened to have several of the mob arrested, this happens. On May 19th, a mob of several hundred brought her to Folsom Bridge, a very famous bridge in Georgia. The mob hung her upside down from a tree and doused her in gasoline and motor oil and set her on fire. Turner was still alive when a member of the mob split her open with a knife, spilling her unborn child upon the ground. The baby was then stomped to death by the crowd. It was alive. They stomped the baby to death by the crowd, and Turner's body was then riddled with hundreds of bullets as they all took turns shooting her dead body. Whew. Horrific, right? I mean, it's something straight out of a Hellraiser movie, right? I mean, it's god awful. I cannot think. You got to wonder, how can that many adults, humans, do that, right? If I walked up and saw them doing that to an animal, I couldn't handle it. I couldn't see an animal treated that way, let alone a human. All for the crime of saying her husband didn't commit a crime that he probably didn't commit. Now, Walter White was the reporter that came down to investigate, and he reported on this. Now, Walter White was white enough to pass for white people, but he himself was black. Because remember back then, if you were 1/16 black, you were technically black. So he was black, but he was clearly white enough to pass as a white person. Now, his stories would expose the North to the horrors of lynching. So he's the only reason we even know this happened. It's because this Walter White reported on it. So what happened is they tried to pass the anti-lynching bill, right? The Dyer anti-lynching bill is proposed in Congress in 1918 by a Republican congressman. Now keep in mind the two parties are flip-flopped. So Republicans are the progressives, like Lincoln was a progressive. The Democrats are the conservatives, right? So anyway, so this congressman from Missouri attempts to pass, and it does. It does pass in the House, but it gets shot down by the Senate. So it makes it through the House, but it dies in the Senate due to Democrats in the Senate. Slowly over the years, lynchings would decline on their own, right? Not because no law or anything like that. And thank you for joining us, Quinn. They would spike again in the Great Depression. And my kind of question is, why do you think that is? Why do you think it spikes during the Great Depression? Well, think about it this way. If you're starving to death, it
becomes a lot of people.
Yeah, it becomes very easy to blame, the most vulnerable among us. It becomes very easy to blame them, right? As the war would help alleviate the problems of the Depression, lynchings would begin to subside. As blacks returned home from service, many would want to have more equality, and this would lead to another spike in lynchings, right? Was them wanting equality. Then the next great event's going to happen, and if you've had my class, you've probably already seen some of these slides or some semblance of it, but on August 25th, a young black child from Chicago dared to whistle or say, "Hey baby," depending on the account. I think the newest account, he didn't even say anything. But anyway, walked into a convenience store, and either way, he triggered this white lady, right? This lady told her brother and her husband, who found the young man staying with his uncle, a guy named Bob Mose. On August 28th, the two men would abduct the boy in the middle of the night at gunpoint. The men would round up other racist men who would beat the poor boy to death and mutilate his body. They would then tie his body to a fan belt and throw him into the Mississippi. Now, it should be of note, when they began to dredge the Mississippi River for his body, the problem was not that they couldn't find a body. The problem was that they found so many bodies, they could not figure out which one was Emmett Till. So the Klan had been using that as an old dumping ground for years. There were so many young black men that had been lynched and thrown into Mississippi, they couldn't figure out who it was. The body they found had been horrifically disfigured by the lynching. His mother would choose to have an open casket to shock the world. She wanted the world to see what they had done to her baby. After the world saw what had happened, the first time in U.S. history, 2 white men were put on trial for the murder of a black person. Despite a mountain of evidence and testimony, and the 2 men were found innocent in front of an all-white jury. Knowing they had gotten away with murder and knowing they couldn't be put on trial again, the 2 men would have an interview in Jet magazine, a famous black publication, where they admitted to having killed Emmett. This would be a day that most civil rights leaders decided enough was enough, right? And so a lot of times you read civil rights leaders, they all talk about this was the day they decided to become a civil rights leader. The thing I kind of think about is, you know, y'all just saw the Ahmaud case. How does that impact you? Is it the same? Is it different? Like, what was that impact on you? I want to hear in the comments below, you know, do you think it's a similar situation? Do you draw parallels? I mean, we don't know. For all we know, these 2 guys, there could be new evidence or something. I don't know what it could possibly be, but maybe there is. They have not had their day in court. And for all we know, justice could end up being served. Maybe they get life in prison. I don't know.
Wait, they're not still alive, are they?
Not these 2 guys. I'm talking about the guys that just recently shot Ahmaud.
Oh.
But I'm curious what you think. Like, what parallels do you draw from it? Let me know in the comments section. Like, how did this event sparking the civil rights movement? Do you think it's going to spark a new civil rights movement? We've had some very public, famous lynchings here recently. In the Soviet Union, the meeting was covering the racial tension in the U.S., and a major part of the Cold War was a war of moral superiority. When the U.S. media tried to bash their issues of oppression, it gave them the ability to respond, well, aren't you lynching blacks? So our government was realizing this is becoming a real problem for us in the Civil War. Because how are we supposed to claim that we're this fair, just, democratic... Like, how will we make the argument that capitalism works and that communism's oppressive when all communism has to say is, well, aren't you lynching black people in the streets? That doesn't seem like that's working. So it became a huge issue for the morality of it as well as, the optics of it on the world stage, right? Now, following the events of Selma, the Civil Rights Act was passed. If you're not aware, the Civil Rights, the March on Selma, basically a group of black people decided to march on the Capitol of Selma to try to vote, and it resulted in them releasing tear gas and beating some people to death. So it was really horrific. Now, the next one I want to talk about is one of a guy named James Craig Anderson. Anderson was working on the assembly line at a Nissan plant in North Jackson, and he helped his longtime partner raise a young child. So it's a guy... he's a factory worker in a Nissan plant in Jackson, right? An 18-year-old Daryl Dedman led a group of white teens who robbed and beat Anderson, and Dedman then ran him over with his truck, right? So a modern-day lynching. This is in 2011. He's just wrong place, wrong time. Now, the Anderson lynching would lead to a future legislation that would create what we now have as the hate crime laws in some states. Should be of note, in Georgia, you think if there's one state that needed hate crime lynching laws, it would be Georgia, but Georgia didn't have a hate crime statute. What a shocker, right? These laws carry with it extra heavy sentences for those that are racially motivated. And my thoughts are, what do you think about hate crime laws? Do you think it's a good idea? Do you think we need to expand on it? Do you think it's outdated? It's not necessary anymore? What do you think, Elizabeth?
Well, if we didn't have them, we would probably still be doing that.
Yeah, so do you think we should get rid of them? No. What do you think we should do?
Probably enforce them more?
Yeah, expand on it. Well, I mean, some of them don't have them. I don't know if Louisiana does. Let's see. Let's see. Let's see, does it?
Okay, so it was the first state to add it.
Hold on.
Wait, that's on Wikipedia. Maybe. Maybe not.
Okay, so we do. We do have it based on race, age, gender, religion, creed. Yeah. So we do have it. Yeah, it should be of note, Georgia does not. Yeah, it looks like more than half the states do not. Yeah, here, let me show you, bring this over to you. So these are the states that have no hate crime laws. So you can murder people based on a hate crime, and it's perfectly acceptable. Yeah, I'm with you. I think they need to expand them and improve them. I think it should be a federal law. I don't think that should be a state thing.
Yes, it should be a federal law.
Yeah. So lynching today is not as common. In most cases, end up surrounded in controversy, right? So the lynching happens, and then everybody digs in and starts making excuses for the lynchers, how it's not really a lynching. There was a lot of cases I thought about going to, right? You could talk about like I wanted to stay away from ones where it was law enforcement that were, because, you know, by definition, a lynching is when it's not law enforcement, right? And the guys that shot Ahmaud, one of them was an ex-police officer, ex-private investigator, but he was not a cop at the time. So I want to talk about this one. And the next one, y'all probably already know about it, but in 2012, a 17-year-old boy, an unarmed kid, had walked home from the store to get some candy. He was coming home from with some Skittles, right? He's walking through his mostly all-white neighborhood. And on a trip home, the self-appointed head of the neighborhood watch tried to question him, right? And that's this George Zimmerman. Now, it should be of note, he put himself in charge of that, right? Nobody voted on him. He was not, there's no officially recognizing of him as the head of the neighborhood watch. He just gave himself that title, right? Now, Trayvon saw that he was walking up questioning with a gun, and Trayvon tried to flee. He tries to run and hide, right? While he's looking for him, he's driving around, George Zimmerman will call the police and say, hey, I'm searching for a suspect, gave him the description, blah, blah, blah. And the police said, do not keep looking for this kid. Get back in your car, go home. We got it. Do not, like, we're almost there. Do not enforce street justice. Don't do it. Zimmerman ignored the police and continued to search anyway.
That should be an automatic thing for him to be in jail.
Yeah, well, hold on, it gets worse. He would find the boy hidden in some bushes. He comes out, still has his gun, and feeling cornered, the boy finally attacks Zimmerman. Zimmerman, while he's on the ground, he's getting his head bashed in on the cement. Zimmerman would pull out his gun and shoot the unarmed kid, killing him. He would face charges the next day, but would get off on all charges. Notice the next day, he isn't arrested on scene. the next day after the information came out. Then he gets arrested. It should be of note, I think he's in jail now. I think for domestic violence. So it's a very violent dude.
He murdered someone.
Yeah, but he got off on it. He got away with it. So this is where I kind of ended up, and this is where I kind of put it to you. And I wish my generation was leaving a better world for y'all to live in, right? Whether you're talking about pandemics, whether you're talking about whatever, right? Lynchings, race issues, whatever. I really wish my generation had been some giant beacon of hope and nobility, rational thought, so on and so forth. But my kind of question to y'all is, what can we do? How do we fix this? And let me tell you this, I'm telling you this in all humility as a teacher who studied this. I don't know. I don't know how we get out of this. I don't know where the finish line is, if there even is a finish line. It's probably going to be left for smarter, wiser, younger people than me to solve. But what do you think, Elizabeth? How do we end lynchings? And I think you got to go to the broader case in general of racism in America. But let's focus it in on targeted. I mean, can we ever do it? Is it possible to end lynching? I mean, we've seen it reduced, but
there's just so many racist people.
You don't think it'll ever go away? Well, how do we fix that then?
I think if we were to make it like a federal law for hate crimes to be there, like people still it's a federal law that you can't steal. It's a federal law that you can't murder people. People still do it all the time.
The thing I keeps taking away in my brain, and this is the only solution I have, is to further integrate the schools. I constantly always say this same mantra, but I believe it, which is diversity is the inoculation to racism, to bigotry. That's the only thing I can really think of. But hey, if you have a better idea, look, because I hate to be brutally honest, but it's going to be up to y'all. I hate that. I wish, look, I'm going to do my part as long as I breathe air in these lungs. And I'm not that old. I got a lot of life left to be lived. But the reality of it is, I don't think it's going to be solved by my generation.
I think whenever you're being put on trial for murdering, for literally murdering someone who did nothing wrong and they were of another race, you should not be put on trial with a jury that can decide if you're innocent or not by a bunch of racist white dudes.
Yeah, well, it's not supposed to be.
Okay either.
It's supposed to be a jury of your peers. So it's not supposed to be a selected jury.
It needs to be people that you don't know, and you can't bribe into doing anything.
Yeah. And I tell you, Raby says
races as well.
Davey says, I think there should be clear and concise rules to govern justice and consequences for breaking these rules, no matter what. Man, that's a great response.
It needs to be
really great response.
It needs to be biased people. No,
right.
Maybe not.
Well, listen, that's going to do it for me today. Thank you so much for your dedication to education. I appreciate this. I know it's a hard topic. I will see you on Wednesday. Hopefully you're all here for my next Pandemic Wednesday. I'm looking forward to it. It's not going to be a cheerier episode per se, but at least it's not going to be so gut-wrenching, I guess, so heartbreaking. So thank you all for showing up. I appreciate your dedication to your education, and until next time, goodbye.